Hello, everyone, and welcome to another debrief session with eGMAT. Today, we have with us Arjun, who scored a 695 on the recent GMAT focus attempt. So, welcome, Arjun, and thank you for joining in.
Thank you so much, Ava. Thank you. And thank you to the entire team. The course was super helpful and glad to speak with you.
So, Arjun, I know that it's been an incredible journey for you, right? Where you started in your initial mock, when you started off your score, you were at a 605. That is equivalent to a 75th percentile. And at this point, it's a 98th percentile with a 95 percentile in quants and a 96 percentile in verbal. So, reflecting back on your journey, what do you see as the biggest challenge that you overcame?
So, my opinion, the biggest challenge was timing on the verbal section. And on the DI section, just getting used to DI, also timing, new section, a lot of uncertainty around it, not a lot of official material. So I think the two big challenges would be the DI section and pacing on the verbal section.
Mhm. So now, when you talk about the verbal, right, because you just mentioned, so in your case, you landed up with a V85, right?
Yeah.
And when we actually look into your stats also, they were backed by exceptional scores. So I just share my screen, and here we can see that, this is your account where these were your last 20 attempts of hard questions. And CR is actually hitting 100% and RC is an 85%, right? Which is exceptionally well done, right? So before you actually take the test also, it was quite evident that you are almost there. You are hitting those matrices. So when you talk about, your verbal, what were the key skills that you actually developed and how did your processes change that helped you, excel in verbal?
Yeah. So I think the mistake that I was making at the beginning that the course helped me rectify was that I was going off of intuition, and I think I was sounding things out. This sounds correct, and not really understanding, for example, how the premise is leading into the conclusion on CR, or what's really the author's opinion on RC.
Mm-hmm.
I was sort of just winging it, honestly. So
Mm-hmm.
what changed for me is that the I got a clearer process on both of those questions. With CR, the process was the pre-thinking.
Mm-hmm.
It was thinking about the conclusion, how the facts lead into it, and if there is a gap, if you bridge that gap, then that's a strengthened question. If you widen that gap, that's a weakened question. And really thinking about CR questions from that lens.
Mm-hmm.
And with RC, it was just, I think, being more precise with reading. The reading strategies module also.
Mm-hmm.
Just knowing where to stop, knowing what to pick up, knowing how much to stress and how much, like, well, not to obsess over like every single thing that's been written in, for example, a science passage of like 15 different experiments and things that are going on, not obsessing over that, but still hanging on to what's really the important crux of the passage. So I think the reading strategy is built in pre-thinking are the two clear takeaways that helped improve my verbal score.
Mm. And Arjun, regarding the focus practice, right? Like on the platform, you have used a good about 300 plus questions only on the verbal section itself,
Yeah.
right? And you did the cementing phase also as part of your preparation. So, what value did the cementing stage add for you?
Yeah, so I completely agree with what is said in the course, because I followed the same like progression of items on the curriculum. So
Mm-hmm.
I watched the video, I did the practice exercise that's within the video, and then I did the cementing quiz. And the benefit of that was that when I had finished preparing for all the sections, and when I started taking like mock exams, or when I started taking sectional exams, I found that all of those things were very fresh in my memory. Like all of those concepts were there. And even
Mm-hmm.
if I needed to review them, what I would usually do is that I would go to the last practice quiz within each module.
Hmm.
And I would look at my mistakes on those last practice quizzes, or I would review those questions, because I in each module, I think there were 1 or 2 points where we were doing GMAT styled questions based on that module. So
Yes.
if you want to do a quick review of that module, just go back to that video, that those set of questions,
Hmm.
and review those. But I think what cementing did for me was reduce the need to do that. So
Hmm.
when I started my practice, it was already starting at that level of understanding of the concept, and the things that I had to build on in my practice phase were mostly just the timing.
Hmm. Hmm. And because you followed the structure that was given to you in the plan, right? The study plan. So when we talk about the personalized study plan, you created that at the beginning with your 605 score. So what role did that personalized study plan help you with?
Yeah, just keep me on track, keep me accountable.
Hmm.
Um, it'll give me notifications to say you have 4 modules remaining. Please do them.
Hmm.
Uh, just keeping me honest and keeping me accountable.
Okay. Now, once you were done with your verbal, your next section that you had to get started was your quants,
Yeah,
right? In quants, when we talk about your starting ability, you were starting at a slightly decent ability when compared to your verbal and DI, right?
yeah.
But since you have gone through the course and you use the PACE architecture, right? So, what were the benefits that you saw using the PACE?
So the first thing is I think pace itself is a really cool thing in my opinion, because especially for people who are trying to go slightly quicker with be quicker with their prep. I think it's great that you don't have to do the modules, that the course ranks that your ability is already at the level of those questions. So you don't need to repeat those modules. But
Hmm.
in terms of process, I think I think the most important thing that was added to my process is being very organized with information on questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this especially about really involved and intensive word problem questions. Sometimes by the time you reach the end of the question, you don't even know what the question was, because there's a lot of detail in some of those word problem questions.
Mm-hmm.
So taking the time to translate information off of that and making inferences off of that, I think just being really organized with my working is the first, like the biggest takeaway from the quant course for me.
Hmm. And interestingly, you mentioned about WP, but you saved a good about 37 hours to 38 hours approximately in your entire quant journey,
Yeah.
right? But when I was looking into your stats, I noticed your algebra, especially, right? Because this was something that did come to my notice, because overall, when we look into only your hard accuracies also, you had a bit of a struggle in the starting phase, right? Initially, it was a little bit of a bumpy ride, right?
Yeah,
But when we talk about the most recent attempts, right, the last 15 attempts, you were hitting that 73% in hard accuracies, and a 70% on the scholaranium translates to a good about 90th percentile,
yeah.
right? So do you recall what were the struggles that you actually faced in the initial stages, and what changes did you actually make, because this is a huge jump that we are looking into.
Correct. No, no, honestly, just applying the same principles that are advocated for in the course, being really careful about what is being asked in the questions. If if you're asked what the probability of X is, you're not giving them the probability of not X. If the second thing would be, I think this would specifically apply to algebra questions. Some of the conceptual understanding was I think was lacking. That
Hmm.
I was able to bridge some of those gaps, even though I come from an economics background. I felt that I was doing some things wrong with my algebra, which is probably reflected in that 43% over there. Uh, so even conceptually, conceptual understanding, and obviously, as I mentioned in the previous section, just keeping a calm head, keeping everything organized on the page. I think the questions themselves, this is my personal opinion on the GMAT, don't get excruciatingly tough. They don't get as tough as, for example, a CAT. The questions would get on a CAT exam.
Mm-hmm.
But they're really testing that reading, how organized can you be, how focused can you be. So all of those traits.
Hmm. So, when you were done with your verbal and quants, right? Then you moved to the third section, the DI. But in your case, the DI was one of the weakest,
Yeah,
right? When we talk about in comparison, because you started at around a 66th percentile, right? So definitely it was not just a process gap, but conceptual gaps were also there, right? So
yeah.
in DI, when we talk about how you used to solve questions when you started off in the first place, right? And because timing is something that often comes when we talk about DI, that
Yeah.
is a little bit of a pain point, right? So what was your pain point in DI, and how did the course help you to overcome that?
Yeah. So definitely timing. That is definitely a challenge. Honestly, when I started with DI, I found myself slightly lost with all of the question types, probably minus DS. DS was something that was less of a challenge, but even within DS, the verbal variety of DS was
Hmm.
some like it took some getting used to. But honestly, if I sideline data sufficiency, then all other four question types had a learning curve for me. So graphics, table analysis, MSR, and two-part analysis. Within them, I think graphics, interpretation, and table analysis were where I learned quicker because I think the modules spell it out very nicely. There are correlation questions and then there are estimation questions. And I think generally they are slightly more intuitive than the other two types of questions. So I think just going through the lessons and then doing the semantic exercises, graphics interpretation and table analysis, that's how they got better.
Mm-hmm.
MSR and TPA were the two big struggles of my, I think, like the entire GMAT process. Probably those were the two kinds of questions that I found hardest.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, on MSR, I just found myself lost in the information. I was like, how much of this should I write down? Should I, if there is math involved in the MSR question, should I solve that first and have my answers ready, or should I look at the question and then do the math and see how much math is required or not required? What if they don't ask me a question in it altogether? Then what should I do? So
Hmm.
I think all of those questions and what level of processing is to be done before you start attempting the questions is the biggest takeaway in MSR that the course brought.
Hmm.
Uh, two-part analysis also similar, like the verbal two-part analysis is very similar to CR. So
Mm-hmm.
I think all of those skills translated into the verbal two-part analysis questions. Similarly, like the core skills of the quant two-part analysis also come from the quant section, but those were the type of questions that I found to be the hardest.
Hmm.
Uh, just because I needed to get used to the concept of using the relationship to get the answers and not the actual answers to get the answers.
Hmm.
So I think that mental calibration was extremely important. That here you're not going to get x is equal to 5, y is equal to 3. You're going to get like some relationship between the variables. And then there's probably going to be some trial and error involved. And that's how math TPA questions are going to be more often than not. So I
Hmm.
think that was generally the progression.
Yeah. So Arjun, you mentioned something very interesting. You said that the skills that you developed in CR or your verbal really helped in your other sections also, right? So what were those specific skills that you could translate, like something that you could translate to other sections also?
So CR it's the same argument. So it's you're still pre-thinking it. Is
Mm-hmm.
that you're not just thinking of it as a strengthened question, you're thinking of it as a strengthened and a weakened question, which is the variety that you get in TPA verbal. So I think that translates almost perfectly. TPA verbal questions are obviously slightly more challenging because you need to keep track of both directions of the arguments, what's going to strengthen it and what's going to weaken it. Directionally, you have to think of both of those things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think conceptually, there's no difference between a regular CR question and a TPA verbal CR question. The other thing in quant is also like they're not testing anything out of the ordinary on DI in quant. They're testing stats, they're testing algebra, they're testing rates and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, all of those skills are there in the course, just that they're in this new variety of questions where it's almost as if you need more time to get used to the type of the question than the content of the question.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you know what rates are, uh, the first time you see a TPA quant question on rates, you're probably going to struggle a little bit because of using the relationships and the trial and error and the elimination process that's involved in that process. So I think there's some translation of skills that is significant, but the second portion of it, which the DI course specifically tackles, is just getting used to those question types and the way they're formed and the best way to tackle them.
Mm-hmm. And Arjun, while we were interacting earlier, you mentioned about the reading strategies, right?
Yeah.
And how that was a little bit of a game changer for you, right? So could you elaborate more on that?
Yeah. So like I said, I think in my opinion, the biggest skill that GMAT is actually testing is your reading, because I think reading is a skill that transcends all three sections. You you can't get a quant question right without reading the question correctly, and you obviously can't get verbal questions right without, and similarly for DI. So that precision in reading is, I think, a key concept that is being tested, and developing that reading strategies, especially because in the course, the way the course is structured, verbal is taught first, and within verbal, this is the first module which is taught.
Hmm.
So I think doing that reading strategies thing, the first, like starting out my GMAT prep is the first thing that was extremely helpful, and yeah, that has had a major contribution in improving my score.
Hmm. Great. So, Arjun, when you were done with the course part of it, right? Because that's the learning, right? You are learning the processes, you are learning the concepts, and then you did focus practice in the cementing stage. But finally, it makes sense to start taking the mocks so that you
Correct.
actually get acclimatized to the test environment, to actually sitting for that lengthy, duration, right? Prepare yourself mentally. So, what were your experiences with the mocks? How many mocks did you take? And were there any specific strategies that you made sure that you applied not just in the mocks, but on the actual test too?
Yeah. So I did 6 mocks. So I took the 2 free mocks that you get with your registration from MBA.com. I bought one, and then I did the resets of all 3 of them. So that
Hmm.
makes 6. My strategy for for quant, I did not have like a timing strategy as such,
Hmm.
because timing was not that big of a struggle on quant. On
Hmm.
quant, the process was calm yourself down, don't make a silly mistake, check your work, be thorough with everything.
Hmm.
Uh, Checking your calculations might take 5 or 10 seconds when you're doing that. And I think the quant section allows for that extra time. We have over 2 minutes per question. So that slight investment was something that I was making, like checking your processes.
Hmm.
It was on quant, it was just about being systematic, being organized, being thorough, and checking your work and making sure that you're not making any error, that you like, if you're capable of getting a question right, you're getting that question right. If that
Hmm.
question is too difficult for you, then there are going to be some questions that are going to be difficult for you, then you guess and move on.
Yep.
That was the thing on Quant. On verbal and DI, the thing that I thought about was that even if I miss two or three questions in these sections, I'm going to get to a sectional score, most probably, unless I miss the extremely, extremely easy ones.
Hmm.
I'm going to get to a score that I'm going to be fine with.
Hmm.
So my verbal strategy and my DI strategy was to do 18 questions on DI
Hmm.
and 21 questions on verbal.
Hmm.
Even if that means that I'm guessing the last two, I want to be thorough on those 2021.
Hmm.
Thankfully, on actual test day, it did not come to that.
Hmm.
On verbal, at least. On DI, I had some guesses,
Hmm.
but that was the process going into it. That on verbal, if I find the questions challenging, and if I feel that giving the questions those extra 10 seconds is going to give me some extra points, then I'm going to invest that time and I'm going to take a couple of guesses.
Got it. Got it. And while you were going through all these mocks, right, or these quizzes, how did you make sure that, you are actually learning from your mistakes? So were you maintaining some kind of notes or error logs for that matter?
So I use the error log template, which is there in the course. So I was making an error log. I was tracking. So every day that I would take a mock, I would sit and analyze the questions that I got wrong. And then for all the questions that I got wrong, I would categorize them into various themes.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like for example, if I got a CR question wrong, then what type of question was it? Okay, if it was a evaluate question, then why did I get this question wrong? And then I'll probably do some questions. I'll review the evaluate section from, excuse me, from the course, or
Mm-hmm.
I'll do some questions that are evaluate questions as practice for that. So that was the process of drilling down the mistake, just focusing on the topic that the question got wrong. Why did I get this wrong? And do some questions on that same topic again, trying to not do the thing that you did wrong.
Okay. And were there any particular patterns that you identified while doing the strategic review?
So in my DI mistakes, the pattern was that I was getting MSR questions wrong a lot.
Hmm.
Uh, so I even till the very end, honestly, I don't think I was averaging more than two questions right per passage of three.
Hmm.
Uh, so that was a big thing. MSR questions was a major flag. The
Hmm.
second was initially on verbal, like my first mock and my second mock, I was missing questions because I I was reading questions and I thought that I was understanding it, but
Hmm.
I did not completely understand the implications of the sentence. So I think you really need to be logged in when you're doing verbal. I think it's the section that, in my opinion, out of the three requires the most amount of attention.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because you really need to digest that information and think about what it means.
Hmm.
Because sometimes what happens is that they give you information in one direction, but it also implies information in the other direction. For example, so making those neural connections, I think was major thing. So verbal being more really reading and understanding, not just reading for the sake of it,
Yeah.
and MSR questions on DI.
Yeah. And I think that's very well put, Arjun, that, I like the phrase that you really need to be logged in, right? While logging in the error logs, because it's not just about tick marking or just treating it as like a task, right?
Correct.
It's not going to benefit you that way. And if you really put in the efforts to identify the patterns, that's the only way you can improve through also. Right.
Correct.
Now, once you had your mocks in place, and in your last couple of mocks, like you mentioned, you were scoring good. You were in that range. You were scoring 695. In couple of mocks, you scored 700 plus two, right? So you knew that you are on your right path. So is that when you decided to book the test date?
Yep. Yeah. So as soon as I started hitting my scores. As soon as I start getting 695, 705s, that's when I decided that it's time to take the test.
Okay. And now finally, why don't you just walk us through, your test day experience? What was that like?
Yeah. So on test day, if we talk about the organization of the place and everything, it's like fantastic. No real struggles getting into the exam or logging in. So no administrative challenges, which was good because I think those can really throw you off. I've heard some accounts of people on YouTube where they say that, oh, our system was not working properly or things of that sort. And I think I was thankful enough to not have any logistical issues.
Hmm.
So that was a major relief. But with the sections, the order that I took the test in was I did the verbal section first,
Hmm.
I did the quant second, and I did DI third. Once again, my reason for choosing this pattern of sections was on the basis of how, like, the degree of mental involvement, in my opinion, the sections required from me.
Hmm.
So verbal required me to be like 120% there.
Hmm.
It was only then that I could get those questions right.
Hmm.
My like if I do verbal questions in the morning versus if I do verbal questions in the night, there was significant difference in my accuracy rates. So I wanted to do verbal with a fresh mind.
Hmm.
And similar reasoning for DI.
Hmm.
I did DI better when I did it with a fresh mind. So I did DI after the break, and verbal was the first section.
Okay.
Uh, Obviously, like, to each their own, but that's how it worked out for me.
Okay.
And yeah, so for the sections themselves, verbal was, in terms of difficulty, I felt that there's no significant difference. Uh, maybe it was just the test day environment that made it feel so, but I felt that my test was slightly more difficult than the mock test, like
Hmm.
marginal difference, not a significant difference. Verbal, there were no real like questions that I saw and went like, this is something that I've never seen before. There were no surprises.
Hmm.
Everything that was in the course, everything that I had practiced was in place. I got, I think, an even mix of CR and RC questions. I've also seen some accounts of people who got 15 RC questions and only 7 or 8, and vice versa. I
Hmm.
think for me, it was a even split. I had 4 RC passages with, I think, 12 or 13 questions, and I
Hmm.
had 10, 11 CR questions.
Hmm.
Uh, in terms of the difficulty in the verbal section, like the last, second last RC was slightly longer, slightly more challenging. Some CR questions here and there that were more challenging than the others. But overall, no big surprises on the verbal section. It went nicely.
Hmm.
And the the big thing for me was just that on test day I felt in the zone. I think that was just the most important thing for me on the verbal section. How much of this am I actually grasping versus
Hmm.
am I reading this for the sake of it? Thankfully, I think it was the former on test day, which
Good.
which paid off.
Yes.
Yeah. Also on CR question types, a bit of everything. Strength and weaken, evaluate, assumption, boldface, everything was there.
Got it.
On quant, once again, I think I saw a lot of word problems. I think everyone is seeing those, but
Hmm.
I got a lot of word problems. I had fair bit of algebra questions also.
Hmm.
I had no questions from coordinate geometry. I had 1 or 2 questions from permutations, combinations, probability. So once
Yeah.
again, a fair mix of all of the question types.
Hmm.
Uh, Once again, like, in terms of difficulty, there were a couple of questions that I felt maybe would take too much time right now. So the strategy that I adopted for those were, okay, maybe I can do this, but I will do this at the end because I don't want to sacrifice the other questions for it.
Yep.
So there were 2 questions of that type that I left for the end.
Hmm.
And Yeah, so one of them I was able to solve, and the other one I was not able to solve. Yeah, but that is how it went. In terms of timing, uh, on the quant section, I was able to finish the section like with 4 minutes to spare.
Mm-hmm.
On the verbal section, also, it was slightly more pressed for time, but I think I was still able to finish the section with a minute and a half or so to spare. So both of those things gave me some time to take one final look at my flagged questions. Just like the maybe look at one question or two question on verbal and two or three questions on quant, just to make sure that if there are any final changes, then I can make those. So that's for verbal. And with DI, so the like a slightly funny thing happened in my break that I took right after quant. Like when I had like a minute or two left for my break to end, the one question that I had guessed and eventually got wrong in the quant section, the answer for that struck me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but it actually did me a
Mm-hmm.
lot of like more harm than good, because in my first 5 or 7 minutes, that was a subconscious thought that was in my mind during my DI section. That combined with the second thing, which was that I saw my MSR quite early in my test. I think I saw it at question 3 or question 4. And because of like my challenges with MSR, as I outlined earlier, I ended up spending more time on those questions than I should have.
Mm-hmm.
So the combination of these two things was that in my first 10 questions on the DI section, even though I just got one question wrong, I had taken up more than half of the time, which is why the second half of the DI section did not go that well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that probably something to learn. If really like let the last section go,
Yeah.
it's okay. Even if it strikes you after that section is over, it's something that I could not do very efficiently, but probably you can.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
That
So that's pretty much
that's
all.
true. Yeah. So Arjun, you mentioned it really nicely that, sometimes you just have to reset your mind, right? And I think this is something that you learned,
Yeah.
in your test, because, maybe that question that in quant that was a little bit hovering in your mind impacted a bit of your DI
Correct.
performance, right? And overall, Arjun, because it's been a journey for you when we talk about, you actively productively putting in the hours, it's been around 2 to 2.5 months, right? Where you actually put in the efforts to get this all done and give the test itself.
Yeah.
Right. So when you look back into this journey, what would be the key takeaways that you feel that you would like to impart with other GMAT test takers?
Like I think the first thing that I would say is I think we sometimes I am guilty of this mistake. In standardized exams, we tend to overstate the importance of content. I
Hmm.
think content is important to an extent, but once you have your prep down, I think it's more mindset related, and it's more the mental frame of mind. So like my big thing would be in your last 2 weeks or 3 weeks of prep, I did not study much at all.
Hmm.
I used to study for maybe 2 hours a day.
Hmm.
If it's not a day that I'm taking a mock, if I'm taking a mock, then obviously it'll be slightly longer. I would spend the 2.5 hours to write the mock. I would spend another couple of hours analyzing those mistakes. But even that, some days I would do the next day and not the day of the mock. So
Hmm.
I think my my big thing to all the test takers would be in the last 2 weeks, chill out. Go for dinners with your family. Uh, Play football if that's what you're into. Do do normal things, and don't try to cram in those last 2 weeks, because in my opinion that'll do much more harm than good. Just maintaining a your regular lifestyle, sleeping on time, eating well, and spending time with friends and family is probably what is going to bring the best out of you on test day.
Yeah. And I think, you know, this was the best summarization, right? And because considering that many people make GMAT their life, right? And tend to forget that GMAT is just part of their life. And I think you summarized it really well that whatever you could do, you've done it.
You've
Right.
done, yeah.
Yes. So the last 1 week or 2 weeks is more about, maintaining or recollecting what you have actually done and not focusing more on the learning part. That should have been done before. Right. So on that note, I think, Arjun, I would really like to take this opportunity to thank you, right, for taking out the time and sharing your insights. And I'm sure that your journey would be inspiring lots and lots of students out there. Right. So thanks, Arjun. Thanks again.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you once again for the fantastic course that you guys have put together. Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.